runaway girls on the street, vulnerable to the sick morons out there that had no better sense than to try to hurt them.
This is being described as one of the nastiest homicides in King County record.
I couldn't believe it. Put the phone down and turned to my wife and said they found 2 more bodies in the river. I gotta go.
The Green River Task Force completed a 3-day search of a wooded area near Starlight. 4 skeletons were found, bringing the Green River death toll to 20.
This guy just wasn't going to quit. These would continue and continue and continue.
Somewhere in our midst is a cold-blooded killer.
It was all about his ability to hunt, his ability to capture, and his ability to kill.
This site was pointed out by Ridgeway as one of the sites that we should search.
At the edge of a forest in the valley of the Green River, a team of detectives works. They are looking for the graves of murdered women, and they are led by the killer himself, a man named Gary Leon Ridgeway.
I have tried to remember as much as I could to help the detectives find and recover the ladies.
In this special edition of Cold Case Files, we are given exclusive access to the hunt for bodies, as well as the investigation that resulted in the apprehension of America's worst serial killer.
How do you plead to the charge of aggravated murder in the first degree?
Guilty.
It is a landmark case in the history of American jurisprudence, one that began along the banks of the very same Green River. It is the summer of 1982, and the Green River flows, like it always has, smooth and silent, emptying its contents into the Puget Sound some 20 miles distant. This summer, however, there is trouble on the riverfront. The bodies of 2 young prostitutes, Wendy Caulfield and Deb Bonner, have turned up in the river's wash. 32-year-old homicide detective Dave Reichert is assigned to work the cases. 3 days after Bonner's body is discovered, Reichert's phone rings. It's a call from dispatch, and more trouble along the river.
I couldn't believe it. I put the phone down and turned to my wife and said they found 2 more bodies in the river. I gotta go.
Reichert heads for a bend in the Green River, where a rafter spotted the bodies, both black females. Crime scene investigators cordon off the area and begin to comb it for clues. Reichert himself is pushing his way through tall grass when he nearly steps on yet another body. This 3rd victim is a light-skinned black girl. Her hair is dyed red, and there are jeans around her neck.
She was face down, if I recall correctly, and so we knew we had a serial killer, obviously, working here.
This is being described as one of the nastiest homicides in King County record. 25 detectives have been assigned to the case full-time, making this one of the largest investigations in the county's history. 5 women, all dumped in or near the Green River in 1 month. The first 2 bodies were so badly decomposed, no semen could be recovered at autopsy. The medical examiner, however, does recover semen from 2 of the last 3. Marcia Chapman, Cynthia Hines, and Opal Mills. Chapman and Hines have a history of prostitution. Opal Mills is a 16-year-old junior in high school. Kathy Mills is her mother.
Probably about a week before she was murdered, I had showed her a picture of one of the girls in the paper. She was on the bank of the river, and I said, Opal, look at this. This is what can happen to you if you get out there hitchhiking. And she said, oh, Ma, that isn't going to happen to me.
But it did happen to Opal Mills, and seemingly could happen to anyone. With the body count at 5 and counting, community unrest begins to grow. King County detectives are now forming a task force to investigate the murders. They have no suspect, no motive, and very little evidence.
The news media, of course, wanted to know, what are you going to do? This looks like a serial killing to us, too.
The case is quickly dubbed the Green River Killings. King County forms a task force with Dave Reichert at its head. The detectives field hundreds of tips. Promising leads are followed, but go nowhere. Until, that is, Reichert runs across a taxi driver, a modern-day Travis Bickle named Melvin Foster.
You can be your brother's keeper or just another bearer of the mark of Cain. I'm not a religious fanatic, but I do believe I have to be my brother's keeper when the time arises.
Each evening, as most of Seattle climbs into bed, Melvin Foster gets into his cab and drives. The ex-con works the midnight shift through some of the city's meaner streets.
When you drive after dark in any city of consequence, you're going to meet the other side of living. I was seeing a lot of runaway girls on the street, vulnerable to the predators, the sick morons out there had no better sense than to try to hurt them.
Foster calls the police with the name of another cabbie, a man Foster believes might be the Green River Killer. The more Foster talks, however, the more investigators believe Foster himself might be worth taking a look at as a suspect.
One of the first things you should look for is a person who injects themselves into an investigation like this. So that phone call certainly raised our intent. It's got us very interested.
Foster is brought in for questioning. He freely admits to knowing many of the girls who were killed, giving them rides in his cab, and providing them with food and shelter.
I was being asked things like, how come you drive the girls around? And do you mean let them in the car, let them warm up and dry out when it's raining and cold? How come I feed them? How come I foot their rent if they need it? Who else is going to do it?
Foster's connection to the girls makes him King County's hot suspect. The cabbie is placed under round-the-clock surveillance. Search warrants are executed on his home and cab. Foster protests his innocence and takes his case public.
Are you scared at all?
Scared, no. Fright is for the guilty. I went to the investigative arm of the news media. This is my name. This is what I'm accused of. Here is my life. Take it apart.
For nearly a month now, undercover officers have been stationed in this area, keeping a 24-hour watch on Melvin Foster, who lives just up the road from here.
In the months immediately following the murders, press and police oblige, taking Foster's life apart and finding nothing that links the cabbie to any of the killings.
Did you kill all those women or what?
No, but I wish I did. I wish I did know who did. Because, I put a stop to him. If somebody's going to point the finger at me and say, well, maybe you did this, I'm not going to wither up and turn and run. I'm going to stand there until I wake up and smell the coffee.
Melvin Foster is eventually dismissed as a suspect, and the Green River investigation goes cold.
So once again, there is speculation that investigators on the Green River case are back to square one.
Meanwhile, 1982 draws to a close. No new bodies surface in the Green River, and people begin to believe the killing season is past.
I think the feeling was that the killer had stopped. Somebody had come in, they were mad at prostitutes, and they killed a few, and they left.
That feeling, however, is so much wishful thinking. The Green River Killer hasn't slowed a bit. The bodies are there. It's just a matter of knowing where to look. In the winter of 1983, Detective Dave Reichert walks a lonely beat. With the Green River killings now 7 months cold, Reichert's task force has been disbanded. The public all but forgotten the murders. With nowhere else to turn, Reichert stops by the office of a friend, who also happens to be one of the foremost criminal investigators in the country, a man named Bob Keppel. He agrees to sift through the files and assess the case. What Keppel finds is a large investigation with a lot of holes in it.
It was marginal at best. And I say marginal because they really didn't have a dedicated methodology to approaching pimps and prostitutes about gaining information from them. A lot of the information they collected was never corroborated in a way that you could say, okay, this victim was missing on this date at this time.
Keppel introduces new protocols to organize, classify, and assess information developed in the field. Keppel also tells Reichert the Green River Killer is not finished killing, and had most likely never stopped. The error made by investigators, focusing their efforts on the river itself, and assuming all of the victims would be dumped there.
When you have a murder problem, the issue should be, what are we doing about the problem? Not arbitrarily eliminate cases just because you don't think that they should be related. Well, do you know or do you not know? And if you don't know, then they should be thought of as a group.
Keppel suggests a fresh look at unsolved cases from the past year and a half, focusing on young girls strangled and dumped in an outdoor location. 3 unsolved crimes immediately catch Keppel's attention. 2 involve prostitutes. The third concerns a waitress, the victim of a bizarre death ritual that gives Keppel a glimpse into the mind of the Green River Killer. "25 miles southeast of Seattle, in the foothills of the Cascades, a family is hunting for mushrooms when they come across a strange death scene. The victim is a young woman named Carol Christensen. Her body is found face up. A paper sack is placed over Christensen's head, her hands folded across a bottle of wine. Over those hands, ground up sausage, molded in the shape of a pyramid. Then across Christensen's shoulder and throat, 2 trout. Keppel is unsure what each of the objects means. Of the overall scene, however, he has no doubt. It is the classic signature of a serial killer.
She was out there for a reason. And probably the main reason was that the killer wanted to come back and see her like that.
The display of Christensen's body is intended to be a trophy of sorts, a way for the killer to relive his crime. Following up on this murder, the Green River Killer appears to hit full throttle. In the summer and fall of 1983, bodies of young women litter the King County countryside. Behind a baseball field, 1 body is discovered. South of the airport, 3 more. By the end of 1983, 14 bodies in all, with 23 more women missing and presumed dead. Most of the victims fit the same profile: prostitutes and runaways taken off the streets.
The latest additions to the list only serve as a reminder that somewhere in our midst is a cold-blooded killer.
This guy just wasn't going to quit. There were a good chance that these would continue and continue and continue.
It seemed like we were getting further and further behind him because as we discovered the bodies, recovered the bodies, identified the bodies, we're now months and years behind him.
A second task force is formed, with Reichert again in the lead. But that just seems to goad the Green River Killer into fresh bloodshed. In 1984, 14 more bodies are discovered, 4 in an area near Star Lake, used by the killer as his personal graveyard.
On Monday, the Green River Task Force completed a 3-day search of a wooded area near Star Lake. 4 skeletons were found, bringing the Green River death toll to 20.
The faces of the dead have begun to haunt even the most seasoned detectives. Randy Mullinax is a veteran member of the team.
I really felt like this job and what I was doing was beginning to affect me and affect my family. And it wasn't fair to them, and it wasn't fair to the job.
There were times where I would go to family events, and I would be there, but I'd sit in the corner, I'd be thinking about the most recent find. I'd be wondering whether or not I was going to get called again to go out to another body site because it seemed like I was gone all the time.
The Green River investigation wears on the community as well, some of whom take to the streets and wonder aloud if the murder of a prostitute is really a priority for Reichert and his men.
Women are being killed. The issues aren't being addressed because the women are prostitutes.
It was disgusting to me that they would stand there and say those kinds of things and know nothing about the kind of work that was being done by every single member in that unit.
I didn't think they were doing enough. I thought, no, if this was a policeman's daughter, they would find somebody.
I know that each one of these young girls was somebody's daughter, and they belonged to a family, and the families cared about them. And we were doing the best we could to try to find a guy who was taking their life.
It's just a matter of finding the right person who I'm sure is out there that has the key to this whole case, and eventually I hope we can find him.
As 1984 draws to a close, a community grows increasingly restless, and the Green River Task Force needs a break. They will get it from a most unlikely source, serial killer Ted Bundy, who offers the investigation his theory of the case. A story about a killer Bundy calls the Riverman.
In my opinion, the best chance you have of catching this guy red-handed is to get a sight with a fresh body and stick it out.
In King County, Washington, a serial killer is on the hunt, and police are behind the curve. The Green River Task Force spends most of its days in the woods recovering bodies, leaving little time to actually catch the killer. The community is beginning to ask hard questions, and a sense of desperation is taking hold. In October of 1984, a letter arrives at Task Force headquarters, one of thousands received from the public, offering tips on how to catch the killer. The difference here, the author is a man with considerable experience in the business of killing. His name, Ted Bundy.
Part of the reason I think he wanted to talk to us is that these personalities like to be the center of attention. And he'd been in prison for a while, and what was happening up here in Washington was drawing attention away from his cases and his legacies, so to speak.
Of course, his ego is boosted by this. I mean, it's a way for Ted Bundy to maintain his significance and feel important.
Ted Bundy lives on Florida's death row, convicted of killing 2 co-eds at Florida State University. Bundy, however, hails from Tacoma, Washington, and knows the area where the Green River Killer hunts. He used to hunt there as well, killing at least 8 women in the Pacific Northwest.
He knew that area east of Enumclaw as good as anybody did. He knew the area east on I-90 as well as anyone did.
Reichert and Keppel weigh the pros and cons of talking to the serial killer. and ultimately decide they have nothing to lose. They book a flight to Florida and a meeting with Bundy.
Mr. Bundy, do you have any objection to the recording of this statement? No. You're aware that it's being taped recorded? Yes.
At 3:30 p.m. on November 17, 1984, Reichert and Keppel sit down with Ted Bundy to pick his brains about the Green River Killer.
He liked to talk about murder. He liked talking about the Green River Killer. And he responded to our questions very good, because the questions that we had devised for him were questions about the Green River Killer that were the same questions we would ask him if we were talking to him about his crimes.
Do you see this guy as somebody that might personally come in contact with the police? He doesn't want to get caught. So he's going to make changes in his behavior, both to stay ahead of you and to avoid the listening. He may not be a sophisticated type to step down and analyze this. He knows it like a fox knows stuff. He knows it like any predator seems to know the victim. Not in an analytical way, not in a sensory or intuitive way.
Bundy tells detectives to focus their efforts on the dump sites. Not only do they contain the only physical evidence in the case, according to Bundy, they are a point of obsession for the killer.
The dump site where the bodies are left are significant. There's no underestimating that. In fact, that is really all you have right now. I mean, there may be some other evidence, but these are certainties. No question. The victim and the guy with it, that's a tremendous advantage. That's where I would focus.
Bundy even hints at the reason why the killer might return to his dump sites.
I think there are a couple of things that may sound a little bit strange. I'll offer them to you for what they're worth.
Bundy believes there is a good chance the Green River Killer is having sex with his dead victims.
He believed that the Green River Killer was returning to each of the body recovery sites to do whatever the Green River Killer wanted to do.
And he would say, well, the riverman would go back to the scenes. The riverman would go back and have sex with the dead bodies.
Bundy even suggests a gambit to catch the killer, one that had never occurred to the task force, one that could perhaps only have come from the mind of another serial killer.
In my opinion, the best chance you have of catching this guy red-handed is to get a sight with a fresh body and sneak it out.
He thought we should just keep it quiet and surveil the site and wait for the killer to come back.
If it's a good sight, there's a fresh body that remains there. If you're going to get more than a drive body, you're going to get a guy coming up to the site on foot or in a car.
Ted was correct about it. If we ever did find one, it was probably worth the risk, because we weren't getting there anyway, the way we were doing it, right off the bat.
There is, however, a problem with Ted Bundy's plan. Of the dozens of bodies being discovered by the task force, almost all of them are already skeletonized, none suitable as bait for a killer who wants to have sex with a dead body.
So we can count on you to continue to write us if thoughts that you might have about this case. If you're not bored, I'd love to now that I have a better grip on what's going on.
After 2 days of questioning, Reichert and Keppel say goodbye to one serial killer and return to Seattle to continue the hunt for another. By 1986, more than 50 detectives worked the Green River case. The FBI has weighed in with a profile of the killer, a white male, loner, in his mid-30s. The break in this case, however, will come from old-fashioned police work. Two rank-and-file detectives, Randy Mullinax and Matt Haney, pore through the old files and begin to make some connections between Green River victims and a local truck painter named Gary Leon Ridgeway.
And we could directly connect him with several victims, and the deeper we looked, the more the connections were being made.
One of the first connections, an 18-year-old named Marie Malvar. On the evening of April 30th, 1983, Malvar worked a stroll near the Three Bears Motel. Her boyfriend, Bobby Woods, watched from a nearby car. Around 10 p.m., a pickup stopped, and Malvar hopped in. Bobby Woods rolled out behind the pickup, keeping an eye on his girl. Up ahead, Woods saw what looked like a struggle. He sped up but lost the pickup at a red light. 3 days later, Marie still had not turned up, and Bobby Woods was knocking on her father's front door.
He just told my dad that Marie got in his pickup truck. Had had the description of the truck, had a primer and darker colored truck.
Woods and Marie's father begin a house-by-house search for Marie, or the truck that took her.
And so they were just driving around, and Woods saw it, and he says, that's the pickup right there. And so then they called the police.
The truck was sitting in the driveway of this house, one that belonged to Gary Ridgway. Police questioned Ridgway but found no further evidence connecting him with Malvar, and the suspect was never charged. Marie Malvar is the first Green River victim linked to Ridgway. She is soon joined by a second. In November of 1983, Kim Nelson was 21, when, like so many others, she disappeared off a Seattle stroll.
So many times these women, these girls, just vanished. They were there one moment, their friend would leave and come back 5 minutes later, and they would never be seen again. He was good. He was very good at what he did. He was careful. He was cunning.
Another girl, Paige Miley, caught a glancing look at the John Kim drove away with. Mullinax and Haney pull out the composite sketch generated from Miley's description.
Then we pulled Gary Ridgway's picture and looked at the composite sketch, and it was extremely similar. So then we put together a photo montage and presented that to Paige Miley, and she picked Ridgway immediately.
The connections tying Ridgway to the Green River killings are beginning to overlap and coalesce into probable cause for a search warrant. On April 8, 1987, detectives take bodily fluid samples from Ridgway and conduct a search of his house and truck. Of the thousands of items taken from Ridgway's home, none of them can be connected to any of the victims. Gary Ridgway is never arrested, and the investigation once again goes cold.
As time dragged on, there was a sense of disappointment, still looking for that critical piece that you needed to make the arrest and get the conviction.
With no arrests in the offing, county officials balked at the millions of dollars being spent on the case and slowly begin to shut the investigation down.
Holding the task force accountable for the money it spends presents a dilemma to elected officials. They know the cost of this police work, but how do they determine the value?
It was tough. It was tough to leave. I think it was tough for everyone to leave.
Every investigator was angry that we were being cut back. We still felt that we had a lot of work to do, and we had the energy and we had the ability to identify the killer and catch him.
By 1990, the number of detectives working the investigation has dwindled to one. Finally, Dave Reichert, the man who has been on the case from the beginning, gets promoted to sergeant and told he too must leave the task force.
Because this case was so big, it was like being in a Super Bowl of homicide investigations, and I just lost.
Reichert's feelings are understandable, but misplaced. The game is not over. It's just halftime. "19 years ago, two boys found the first girl, face down and floating in the Green River. She was followed by more than 40 others. Some were dumped in fields and rivers. Others simply disappeared. Detectives believe the killings to be the work of one unidentified man, a man who suddenly stopped killing in the mid-1980s. Dave Reichert was there when the first body was found. Now he is the elected sheriff of King County. Through the years, Reichert has worked hundreds of homicides, but he has never forgotten the Green River killer.
I would continually get tips. Even after I left, people associated me still with this case, so I would get letters and phone calls about specific suspects.
Reichert believes the case can still be solved. His best chance? The blossoming field of forensic DNA. Bev Himmick is a DNA analyst at the State Crime Lab in Seattle. In the summer of 2001, Reichert gets clearance for her to work the Green River case. Earlier attempts at DNA testing had met with failure. Even worse, they had used up almost all of the semen samples collected at 4 different Green River crime scenes. Himmick is left with a few wisps of cotton and the sticks from 4 Q-tips, each containing a minuscule amount of semen. Using a new technique known as short tandem repeat, or STR DNA testing, Himmick does what no one before her could. She harvests a genetic profile of the Green River killer.
It was really exciting. We knew that we've got good potential here to get some information. This is going to happen this time.
Himmick enters the unknown male profile in the National DNA Database, but fails to get a match. Himmick then turns to the suspect list. At the top of that short list, a local truck painter named Gary Ridgway. In 1987, Ridgway provided police with a DNA sample by chewing on a piece of gauze. Himmick pulls out the gauze and goes to work.
I analyzed the gauze that was chewed on from him. That was collected in the 80s, and there was a match.
Within a week, Himmick links Gary Ridgway to 3 more victims. Detective Tom Jensen hand carries the DNA report to Sheriff Reichert's office.
He pulls out this envelope, and he hands it to me, and he says, "His mugshot's in here." And I said, "Tom, I don't even need to open it."
It's Gary Ridgeway.
Despite the DNA links, Reichert is not quite ready to slip the cuffs on his suspect. The sheriff convenes a top-secret group of advisors who counsel Reichert to wait, watch, and build his case. On the surface, Gary Ridgway seems uncomplicated, almost boring. He grew up in King County, right off the SeaTac Strip. Ridgway struggled in high school but managed to graduate. After serving in the military, Ridgway took up work in a paint factory. 30 years later, he is married with a child, still laying paint on trucks, and oblivious to the silent army of detectives that now shadow his every move. Jeff Baird is a deputy prosecutor for King County.
He was spending a lot of time cruising those same areas of prostitution that had been so, to use a word poorly, so productive for him earlier. And eventually, within a short period of time, actually, he was arrested trying to pick up an undercover police officer. So it was evident that he was at least in the process of looking for prostitutes, if not actively seeking to kill them at the time.
The Green River Task Force is playing a dangerous game, keeping an active serial killer under surveillance. It might allow them to gain valuable evidence, but it also gives Ridgway the chance to hunt and perhaps kill again.
The idea that he was still actively picking up prostitutes made it just too dangerous to try to continue to keep him under surveillance, and so it was decided to arrest him.
On November 30th, 2001, two detectives confront Ridgway as he leaves work.
Walked over and they said, "Mr. Ridgway," he said, "Yes, you're under arrest for the murders of 4 women connected to the Green River case." His reply pretty much was, "Oh, okay."
After 14 stalled years, all of a sudden the Green River killer case is revived.
Science provides the link between Ridgway and 4 of the Green River victims. Cold case detectives, however, believe he is responsible for much more. The question is, can they prove it? Skip Palahniuk is a forensic microscopist. Give him a few specks of dust or paint, and he can tell you where they came from.
Our specialty is identifying these very small amounts of material and trying to find everything we can about them.
In the course of examining dozens of murder victims, Sheriff Dave Reichert and his task force have noticed something unusual. Tiny chips of paint found on the clothing of several victims. Microscopic analysis reveals a rare high-end breed of spray paint, known as DuPont Imron.
That paint was not something that someone could just go out and buy. It was a very specific kind of paint for a very specific reason.
DuPont Imron is used almost exclusively for commercial painting. More importantly, it is the brand used by Gary Ridgway at work. For the man hired to defend Ridgway, the paint analysis is bad news.
Now you've got really 4 deaths tied in via DNA or location. You've got 3 other deaths that are tied to Gary by paint. Well, now what are the chances that 7 deaths can be tied in to Gary Ridgway and him not having something to do with them? Well, chances aren't very good.
Ridgway's lawyers have a sit-down with their client and explain the facts of life in a murder case. If Ridgway goes to trial, he will probably lose and earn a place on death row.
And at that point, Gary broke down and started to cry and said, well, maybe he should start cooperating.
Savage extends an offer to the state. His client will take police to the dump sites of women still missing, if he can avoid the death penalty. The prosecutor's initial reaction is predictable.
No. How could I ever consider setting aside the death penalty? If any case screams out for consideration of the death penalty by a jury, this case was it.
Over the next 3 weeks, Mulang wrestles with the idea of a plea for Ridgway and finally concludes that seeking answers for the families is the right thing to do.
It had nothing to do with mercy for Gary Ridgway because he didn't deserve mercy. He didn't deserve to live. It was the victims and the families of the victims who deserved mercy.
On June 13th, 2003, the deal is signed. Gary Ridgway pleads guilty to 48 counts of murder and agrees to tell investigators his story.
How you doing, Gary?
Doing real good.
Sleep okay?
Sleep okay, all the way from...
For 5 months following his plea agreement, serial killer Gary Ridgway exists in isolation and is questioned daily about the details of murder. As detectives suspected, Ridgway hunted on Seattle strolls, promising women any amount of money just to get them inside his truck.
And I would talk to her about that, get her mind off of anything that she was nervous about. And she thinks I'll just die of tears. And which I didn't. I just wanted to get her in a vehicle and eventually kill her.
It's almost as if you can think of Mr. Ridgway's decision tree about killing as sort of a binary process. I mean, you know, he sees an individual, and his first yes/no question that he asks himself is, can I get some kind of sexual gratification out of this person? And if the answer is yes, he goes to the second question, which is, can I kill this person? And if that answer is yes, then he asks himself the question, if I kill this person, will I get away with it? And if he gets 3 yeses, he kills.
As fear of the Green River Killer mounted, Ridgeway would employ any ruse to get a victim inside his truck, even using his son's picture as a devastatingly effective lure for murder.
So every time I opened up my wallet, there would be a picture of my son on one side, and they'd see that, and I would lower any big defenses.
See what a great guy I'm out here picking up prostitutes, but I'm a family man. Would I be would the Green River Killer have a son, a job, and a family?
Eventually, Ridgeway's interrogation team turns to the most important task at hand, getting the serial killer to talk about the women that are still missing.
There's another dump site out there, probably, huh?
He doesn't remember faces or names. The thing that he remembers is where he put them so he could go back and have power and control one more time.
In 1984, investigators consulted with serial killer Ted Bundy about a possible profile of the Green River Killer.
The best chance you have of catching this guy red-handed.
Bundy told detectives that the killer was revisiting his outdoor dump sites for the express purpose of having sex with the corpses. Turns out Ted Bundy was right.
In most of those cases, he went back, and as sick as it sounds, he had sex with the dead bodies. He even describes having to move maggots aside to complete his deed.
At one point, his interrogators attempt to get to the root cause of Ridgway's fascination with the dead.
What was it about having sex with a dead body that you preferred over just going out and getting another woman to kill?
One thing you'd have to pay for, and she was already dead.
Well, Mr. Ridgway is, as you would expect, not a normal sort of person. And one of the few really revealing insights that he demonstrated into his own personality, he was asked by a psychologist whether there was something missing in him that was present in other people. And without hesitation, he replied, that caring thing.
The task force begins taking Ridgway on field trips to previous body recovery sites. The trips seem to trigger Ridgway's memory, and bodies begin to surface.
That is the area where I put her, yes.
Sue Peters is a member of the dig team.
We're out there digging for hours and whacking blackberry bushes, and the reward is finding the body.
In November of 2003, Cold Case Files is given the opportunity to follow along on a dig, part of an effort that results in the recovery of the bodies of 4 young women. As 2003 draws to a close, however, the digs more often than not turn up nothing but an empty hole, leaving the team to wonder if the remaining grave sites might be lost forever.
The job's not done yet. There still are victims out in King County or possibly other jurisdictions that we haven't recovered, we haven't located yet. So I guess we're not 100% satisfied.
The hunt for bodies continues, but the healing has also begun. It starts with Gary Ridgway appearing in open court and answering for his crimes.
How do you plead to the charge of aggravated murder in the first degree as charged in count 1 for the death of Wendy Lee Caulfield?
Guilty.
On November 5th, 2003, a judge reads a roll call of the deceased. 19 years worth of killing at the hands of Gary Ridgway.
Guilty.
As the names were being read off, one at a time, how do you plead guilty? How do you plead guilty? And you get to 17, and then 20, and then 25, and then you're at 30, and then you're at 35, and then you're at 40.
How do you plead to the charge of aggravated murder in the first degree for the death of Shirley M. Sherrill?
Guilty.
Halfway through the litany of women's names, it hit me again just how many people this man had killed. You know, it was as if he had committed an act of genocide.
How do you plead to the charge of aggravated murder in the first degree as charged in count 31 for the death of Debbie M. Abernathy?
Guilty.
And the feeling that you had when you sat there and listened to that plea hearing is, yes, these young women were in a troubled time in their life. But they had moms and they had dads and they had brothers and sisters. They had people that loved them.
6 weeks after the plea comes sentencing, where the families get a chance to speak to the man who took their loved ones. The sentiments range. Perhaps the most powerful, a mood of forgiveness.
You've made it difficult to live up to what I believe, and that is what God says to do, and that's to forgive. And he doesn't say to forgive just certain people, he says to forgive all. So you are forgiven, sir.
The victims' families accomplish what no interrogator could do. Crack the facade of Gary Ridgway.
And I am sorry for you.
The judge who presides over Ridgway's sentencing, however, doesn't buy the tears.
The remarkable thing about you, sir, is your remarkable Teflon-coated emotions and complete absence of genuine compassion for the young women that you murdered. The women you killed were not throwaways or pieces of candy in a dish placed upon this planet for the sole purpose of satisfying your murderous desires. While you could not face them as you took their lives, you will face those young women in your dreams and private thoughts of your grisly deeds. You will be haunted for the balance of your life.
Gary Ridgway is sentenced to 48 consecutive life terms. His story finished. The rest of his life to be spent in a prison cell, alone with the memories of those he killed. For Sheriff Dave Reichert, pursuit of the Green River Killer has been a lifelong quest, difficult at times, but one that has found its own reward.
You know, the thing that's strange for me is that I started out as the lead investigator in this case in 1982, and to be the sheriff now, when it all comes to completion, is just an honor and a privilege.